Senator, we'd like the press to have an opportunity as well, and this is the student newspaper. Okay. So continue your questions. We have time for about 2 or 3 more questions.
Senator, behind all the headlines, there's talk of what one calls the student loan debt bubble that they argue is soon to pop. What are your thoughts on that, and do you have any possible solutions or ideas that would probably help to deflate the bubble rather than to let it pop?
Well, yeah, some questions about the student loan bubble. There's some context required here, I think, which is historical context. Student debt is a relatively recent phenomenon. I graduated from the University of Nebraska in 1965. I worked 20 hours a week and had enough money to pay tuition and drink a little more beer than I probably should have in the least. But we didn't have debt. You didn't have to borrow money to go to college in the 60s, the 70s. It's only sort of late 80s and the 90s through today that debt has become essential to go to college. And you now have over $1 trillion worth of student debt. So I'd say that tells you something. And in my view, what we've got to do more of is providing students with equity. Pell Grants being one of them, but I personally would like to see a student scholarship program in the state of Nebraska. Because you've got to provide that equity. Otherwise, and the next thing I'd say is, there are moments when we ought to be saying, no, we're not going to, we've assessed what it is that you want to borrow the money to do, and we've assessed that it's not worth it. And boy, there's a financial, I can tell you from running a university, there's a financial disincentive to do that. Because I need the money. So you can, you want to enroll at the new school and pay $800 a credit hour to get a BA in media studies. We probably need to figure out how we can provide university presidents with an incentive to say, no, it's not worth it. You'd be smarter to go learn how to be an electrician. You get these moments in higher education, and I haven't got an answer to it, but where you're not giving the right advice to somebody who's going to borrow money to get a degree. And by that I mean assessing whether or not that degree is worth it. And you really see it in the for-profit sector. I mean, I visited one in Omaha. I mean, they're signing up students using Title IV loans with much higher default rates. My guess is Chadron State's got a default rate under 3%. But the University of Phoenix got a default rate of 40%. You'll find them in certain communities training people to be chefs when there isn't a single job in the community open for somebody who's a chef, or such as that. So I'd say that we really do have to sort of look hard at whether or not and how to give academic leadership some incentives at times to say no, because there are times when you're letting somebody borrow something to pay the college tuition. When you sort of look at the facts of the case, you say it's not going to be worth it. I use BA in media studies. I hope there's not anybody in here getting a BA in media studies. If you are, take statistics as well. Take economics as well, because that's worse. You can have a BA in media studies, but if you've got 6 or 9 credit hours in economics and statistics, it's have to be more likely you're going to be able to pay off your debt as a result. So I'd say equity is going to be crucial. I would say trying to figure out how to break this cycle of constantly raising prices. And thirdly, I'd say we got to pay attention, I think, to the for-profit sector, because they now have 25% of all the Pell Grants. Because what they've gotten really good at is enrolling students. And it's easy to enroll students when Uncle Sugar is going to loan you the money.
Maybe another couple of questions, because we want the senator to have a little time to negotiate afterwards.
Yes. I'll do you, and then I'll do you. I feel like it's a double header.
I'd like to have you address the immigration issue, and do so specifically to DREAM Act.
Well, specifically the DREAM Act, I like what Rubio has done with the DREAM Act. Republican Florida. It's basically the same thing with some restrictions. Basically says if you've been brought here by somebody who's undocumented and you achieve certain thresholds, you're going to get legal status. That's basically what it does. It does similar to the agreement Dream Act, but it doesn't make it quite as automatic as the Dream Act did. Look, and while I'm on Marco Rubio, a Republican from Florida, this is an issue where compromise is going to be essential. Because this is one where the perfect becomes the enemy of the good in a hurry. We have about 30,000 people in Nebraska who are here without documents. It's a relatively small number, but it's still population equal to Grand Island. So I start off by saying deportation is economic stupidity. We got to figure out some way to get to legal status. If no other reason other than once you've treated somebody with dignity and respect, it's much more likely that they'll work with law enforcement to go out and get guys at the gangbangers and others who are really doing bad things. And right now there's a disincentive to cooperate. So it's my view that the compromising on the DREAM Act along the lines of what Rubio is talking about is a smart thing to do, because at least we get something done. It doesn't get you all the way to where the DREAM Act would go, but it gets you 3/4 of the way to there. Well, I don't think you can stop that. We got to get better service for people who are trying to come into the United States to work. It takes 2.5 years to get a work visa. It takes way too long to become a citizen once they get in the queue. And I've been quoted by saying, look, the United States has a right to say we're going to place some limitation, restrictions on people who are coming into the country. But I think we have to deal with the people that are already here under a law that apparently is looser than not. Yes.
I'd like to hear you talk about education. You have a little bit in terms of the funding of education, but in particular, I'm thinking of the Spellman's report and raising the poverty, CLB, but especially Arnie Duncan's, vision of a community-based education, but that sort of approach. Where do you think we're going, and where would you like to see school?
Well, just to take away a few specific, I would not vote to renew No Child Left Behind. I think it's the high-stakes testing has been counterproductive. And as I said earlier, I really want to explore the possibility of swapping out K through 12, because I think the big change that's occurred in the last 10 years is that everybody understands we need higher standards and we need more accountability inside of our school system. And having said that, I think that one of the things nice about No Child Left Behind is we can blame the federal government for all of our problems. And once you decentralize it and bring it back to the state, we'll only have ourselves to blame, and the bar's been raised. A high school graduate needs to perform at a much higher level today than a high school graduate needed to perform 20 years ago, 30 years ago. The bar's been raised. And to that end, if you look at what's going on in the community, it's gotten harder as well because the social context has changed. I haven't visited a school district yet. If I ask the question, what's the trend line of free and reduced lunch, and what's the trend line of a single parent at a household, they haven't responded to say the trend line's up in both categories. Well, that puts pressure on the school because you can see it where teachers are being asked to do things that you normally think that parents are supposed to be doing. So it's, I believe that we can continue to make our public schools better. I think they're much better today than they were 30 years ago compared to what they're facing, the challenges that they face. But it's gotten harder. The good news is, we're producing a lot of great graduates. And there's no reason for geezers like myself to be pessimistic about the future based upon the values, enthusiasm, and capability of young men and women who graduated either from high school or from college. But it's an area of particular concern because you can't afford to lose these kids. Last, I would say, among my great passions in education is early childhood education, where if a 5-year-old comes to kindergarten unprepared to do the work, it's hard for them ever to catch up. And we know what to do. I reference me being a geezer. I'm a geezer dad as well. I've got an 11-year-old. And our boy barely spoke when he was 3 years old. And we were able to get him occupational speech therapy intense for a couple of years. And he arrived from kindergarten ready to go. He has introduced me a couple times in speeches. He would be a special needs kid, were it not for that professional and, dare I say it, expensive intervention. We have 35,000 kids born every single year in the state of Nebraska, and at least 4,000 arrive in kindergarten not prepared to do the work. And boy, it's painful because you only get one chance. So I think there's way too many that we're losing because we're not doing enough in that early childhood moment.
If there's one final quick one, we want to give you time to mingle.
When you're in the Senate, given the way that things are now between the houses, and the fact that most incumbents get reelected, how are you going to get compromises?
Well, in addition to fighting to change the rules, because I do think the rules have to change. We've talked briefly about that earlier. I don't think there's any substitute for just doing it. And by doing it, I mean, rather than saying, let's use you and I as an example, why don't you compromise? I think give a little. You know, Chuck talked about this yesterday when he arrived in Senator Hagel, when he arrived in the Senate. You know, I invited him to the meeting, and I had a list of things, 7 or 8 things, where I thought he and I could work together. And what he said in his endorsement yesterday is 100% right. He had to give, and I had to give. Because you can't get there any other way. And there's going to be people saying, all of the Dream Act conversation earlier, people who say, well, that's not what I want. Well, that's not how things get done. So I mean, there's no substitute for just behaving in a way that satisfies the promise that I'm making, which is to behave in a bipartisan fashion. And I don't have to abandon it. There'll be a Democrat. And Chuck knows that I'm a Democrat. He knows where we disagree. I know he's a Republican. I know where we disagree, and I know where the conflicts aren't reconcilable. But there's a long list of things where they are.
Hannah, who is your student coordinator, has an announcement for the group, and then
Thank you very much.
and Bob will be here for about another 15 minutes, so feel free to mingle and talk some more. The senator.
Well, thank you all for coming. I would just let you know that we have a Bob Kerrey campaign office here in Chadron. It is at